So one of the game changers that we believe is going to differentiate the launch of Pulsechain versus the launch of ETH and ETH which are essentially forks of Ethereum with all the historical contracts and transactions and tokens and everything in place, just like a Pulsechain will be. The major difference, one of the major differences, is the AMM fixer bot and Pulsex, right? Pulsex will be a native decentralized exchange based off a pancake swap with additional functionality added to it for governance and voting, additional liquidity providing rewards, and so on, right? So why is Pulsex such a big deal, right? Because of the AMM fixer bot. Now, when Pulsechain is launched, there will be around roughly 1 million Pulse for every ETH that are in existence. So when the copy of the chain is made, the number of units for each Pulse, each ETH that's in a wallet will increase, right? So if you have, if you're providing liquidity for Hex, let's just say, for example, you have $100 of USDC or Ethereum in your liquidity pool, and you have, I don't know what the price is right now, about 2.3 cents or something like that, you would have an amount of Hex in your liquidity pool, right? You are providing both assets in the decentralized exchange so that people can swap in and out of them, right? That ratio determines the value of those tokens and will then determine, okay, the price that people get. Now, why is that important? When you go and you copy the chain, but you change the number of units of the native coin, okay, anything that has liquidity paired with that native coin is now suddenly out of whack, okay? If the value of one ETH is different than the value of one Pulse, okay, now you can see how the value of these tokens that are locked up in liquidity on Uniswap, SushiSwap, and other known exchanges that are being forked over from Ethereum can now be significantly skewed, okay? So what do we do about that? How do we ensure that all the tokens that are forked over, the copies of what come over from Ethereum, actually make sense, that the values of them make sense on Pulsechain, while also increasing the number of units for the native coin a millionfold, right? How do we do that? The answer is the automated market maker fixer bot. And this bot will be the first thing to run on chain before anyone else has the ability to execute any transactions. That bot will be able to mint Pulse, and it will use that newly minted Pulse to go and buy up the tokens that are paired with Pulse now as a result of the fork of Ethereum, right? So in the example of the Ethereum Hex liquidity pool that was paired together that got copied over, right? Every Ethereum is replaced with Pulse. Okay, so now I have Pulse Hex in this liquidity pool paired together, and now I can swap between them. But I have one Pulse for the same number of Hex that were there before. Well, that's not right. So now I need to inject 1 million times more Pulse into that pool to bring those ratios back into line so that the initial value is consistent, okay? Well, how do I do that? I do that by buying up the tokens to basically bring the balance of that pool on the Pulse side up and the balance of the pool on the ERC20 side down, okay? By buying up 99% of the tokens, and here's the thing with the Uniswap V2, you can never buy 100% of any one side, okay? It's just impossible. It's a limit to zero. So if you remember your calculus days in high school or college, right? A limit to zero means it never actually hits zero. You're just getting infinitesimally closer and closer and closer, but you never quite get there, right? So basically in V2, the math works out that you can never actually sell or buy all of one side of the liquidity. So what the fixer bot's going to do is inject 1 million times more Pulse into the pool by buying up 99% of the ERC20, bringing the ratio of the assets back into sync so that the represented values are now in sync with the values that are being shown on the Ethereum mainnet, okay? Now, we want to differentiate ratios from USD value, okay? Remember, this is all happening before Pulse has any USD value at all. It's a very important distinction because we're talking about just the ratios between the assets, and the ratios are being maintained. Total number of ETH versus total number of pulse, and the ETH side of the pool is being adjusted for the proper number of pulse that should represent that same ETH, right? That's what the fixer bot's trying to do. It is trying to bring these ratios back into balance so that you have the right number of assets paired together. And when you go to do a swap in and out of those, you will get a comparable value in those tokens versus what you could have gotten on Ethereum. Okay. Now, what happens to all the ERC20s that are bought up as a result of this, right? Because if you're buying up 99% of all the ERC20s that are paired with Ethereum at the time of the fork, where does it go? That's where Pulsex comes in. And the AMM fixer bot can then mint more Pulse to pair with those purchased ERC20s and redeploy that as liquidity on Pulsex. Now, the extra bonus is this then moves 99% of the liquidity that was previously paired with Ethereum out of the largest known dexes on Ethereum, right, that have been forked over to Pulsechain, and moves that liquidity out and lands it into or deploys it into Pulsex. Now, the details of how that's going to happen and how long it will take for all that liquidity to be deployed is the big question. And I'll kind of pause it there.
So for me, when I think about Fixerbot, there was a lot of notion going around the community that possibly Fixerbot was being deployed from a contract that's Pulsex owned. I don't think that's the case. So like when you think about a smart contract, they can't read data. They can only execute a function when a certain variable is met. So do X, when X and Y meet a certain point, execute K. So for me, I don't think that's going to be what happens. So when you're looking at the forked over liquidity, you wouldn't want 100% of that liquidity up at the start because it just gives people the ability to dump and run essentially and just use you as exit liquidity. And that forked over liquidity is extremely crucial for Pulsechain, mainly for the fact that it, in a sense, stops people from happening to bridge over. They have a copy of all of their tokens, and it gives Pulsechain the ability to thrive and Pulsex the ability to be one of the most liquid dexes that there is. To deploy a smart contract to have that liquidity come out in segments, it's difficult and it's also uncontrollable. So unless it had full admin keys to make state changes for, variables that were to happen, there's no ability to actually control the percentage that goes out and what pairs go out at what time and at what intervals. So for me, I think Pulsex is going to be deployed from a personal address, almost like a benevolent wallet again, where that wallet will be determining pairs, determining percentages of that liquidity that's being deployed at each time, and in a sense, defending the forked over liquidity tokens as well, assuring that people aren't just using it as exit liquidity and sending everything to zero. But again, it is a V2, so theoretically it can't be sent to zero, but it can be sent very close to zero. So for me, I think Pulsex is a benevolent holder of the forked over liquidity. I could be wrong. That for me is just my speculation based off the fact that I don't think 100% of that liquidity would ever be deployed in the initial first days.
I got a question on being a validator. How do you stake with or how's it going to work with like staking with a validator to earn yield? How does that whole system work on this new setup now? And then also if one is a validator, let's say I'm a validator in one spot and I end up moving, a year later. How does that work? Because if you shut off your validator and set up in a new location, does that get you slashed? How does that work?
So when the V3 documents come out, I think we'll host a space to fully run through this, and I'll bring in some people from the community that really specialize in it as well. But essentially, when you are a validator now, it's definitely not delegation anymore. You have to run your own hardware. But yeah, there's an execution layer and a consensus layer, and as a validator, you have to run both clients. Gamma?
So Pulsechain validating is exactly like Ethereum validating right now. You put 32 million Pulse into the staking contract for one validator. That one validator is connected to a wallet that you generate, like separate from your MetaMask, and you could have 100 of them if you really wanted to on, say, a single computer, basics. So 32 million Pulse goes into the staking contract through a deposit command line interface. Basically, you form a transaction with this program that the developers will help you do. You form a transaction, you have already created a separate, say 12 or 24 word seed phrase wallet that will generate an public and private key that you use on your server, on your computer to sign the transactions. And that's connected back to your 32 million Pulse. So you can have your validator. And that works exactly on Pulsechain as it would on Ethereum. And those keys are on your server, on your computer. Like you can literally have a desktop computer in your house, like I have for Go Air Lake Ethereum, and you can run like 100 validators on your computer. Now, the second part of that question is, what if you want to move computers? Well, that's no problem. You have your 24-word seed phrase for this deposit wallet, like on Prism, which is one of the clients for Pulsechain because they forked it from Ethereum, and the other one is Lighthouse. What you do is you actually just recover your validator keys using Prism or using Lighthouse. So you put in your 24-word seed phrase into Prism. It regenerates your one validator that you made or 10 validators that you made that you've been using. You just shut down your computer. Don't worry about slashing because you're not getting slashed to the point where you're like going to get kicked off the network. You're just not earning fees while your computer is off. So you can just shut your computer down. And as long as you have your 24-word seed phrase to get your validator keys back, you just reinstall all the software on the new computer, wherever, and then you regenerate your validator keys on that new computer. And then you just turn it back on. And now you're validating with this new computer. And you don't need to worry about one common problem is you don't want to have two computers with the same keys attesting to blocks and generating blocks because you're going to get slashed. And that's like a major no-no. So as long as you shut down one computer and then you wait 30 minutes, like that's fine. And then you turn your other one back on with the same keys, then you don't worry about getting slashed where you're not double signing anything. There's got a little bit of a delay, right? Between you shut down your computer one, you install your software, regenerate your keys with your seed words, just like you would with a Treasure or MetaMask or whatever, this exact same BIP39 compliant seeds, generate your validator, turn it back on, sync the beacon chain, sync the execution environment, which is Geth or Aragon, which could take a day, it could take a week. It just depends on a lot of factors we don't know because obviously we don't have Pulsechain to play around with. But say 24 hours. You're good. It's just no problem at all.
So it's simple.
Yeah, right. Gotcha. Okay, that makes
Very
sense.
simple.
Now, yeah. That makes sense. Now, what about like earning yield from being a validator? How does that work with this system? Do you like you mentioned there's 32 million Pulse you got to lock up. Do each one of these validators take turns, basically on each block, and then
Yes.
does it?
Yes.
Is there
One
like
question
if
at a
I
time.
lock up? Yep.
So it's you can effectively think of it as like say randomly assigned. So you're going to have 10,000 validators on the network, and they're effectively randomly assigned like their turn to create a block. And so as long as your validator is online, when your turn comes, then you earn the fees that are associated with that block. And as part of the configuration, you give it a MetaMask, a wallet that isn't. So the fees you generate aren't locked in the staking contract. You can give it a hardware wallet Ethereum address, and when you boot it up, it says, "Okay, I'll move all fees you make to this address," and they're liquid. So nobody needs to worry about their fees they're generating being locked up because you just give it an address to say a hardware wallet would be preferable, and then all the fees will be pushed there, be placed there. And then the only thing that's locked up is your deposit until, say, September now, because the Shanghai update is probably pushed to September or whatever. And then you had another question.
So then there's no point in staking more than 32 million Pulse, right? Unless you're creating multiple wallets. Like there's no staking with another validator and earning some of that fees.
You would only put 32 million in because there's zero benefit to trying to put like 33 million or 50 million in one single validator. So yes, you would, if you have 32 million, then you have another 32 million. You create a second validator with the exact same seeds and you say, oh, I want to make two validators. And when you do the setup, it asks you, like, do you want to have one validator? Do you want to have 10? Do you want to have two? And then as part of the deposit, the initial deposit, it'll actually give you two. And then you when you set up originally, then it would create two basically private public key pairs, and then you do two deposits that are tied to those two different accounts. So your computer would have two validators on it, and they would be separate, and then both of them would be tied back to, basically like the same address to get all the fees. But now you're doing two instead of one, but you're doing it on the exact same computer.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah, man, I appreciate you answering those questions.
That's no problem. I've been doing it for 2 years on Ethereum, and Pulsechain now is effectively the exact same setup as I'm running for almost 2 years.
Being able to connect to all these other EVM chains is very important. The users on those chains are there because something about Ethereum they didn't like. Perhaps maybe it was because of the high gas fees or stuck transactions back in the day. And while those things are getting better, you still see these people on these other chains just, doing their business, right? That's an easy crowd to bring into Pulsechain. But if we don't have a direct avenue to get all those people into Pulsechain, and everyone has to go back through Ethereum and pay the high gas fees just to try and bridge out and so on and so forth, it's like, it just makes it more complicated, right? We want a highway to Pulsechain, and we want people to be able to use any chain anywhere that they want to get to where they want to go. Not just one single little 1-lane, 2-lane road going back and forth to one single chain, Pulsechain, right? That to us, that never made any sense.
Well, and the more options people have to come through lower gas chains, right? That allows the people that we want to onboard into Pulsechain or into any project to retain more of their capital. They're paying less in fees to go through all these things they have to bounce through just to go from their fiat to their exchange to Ethereum to Pulse Ramp to then swap in and out of whatever it is you want then into Pulse, right? It's a multi-step process. But when, services come in and allow us to from over, over 25 chains, I believe, and be able to swap from over 15,000 tokens into Pulse directly in one action, you've now opened the door for everybody to have easy access to the platform, right? You've opened the door for everyone to have a cheaper route to the platform, because now you could come in through Avalanche or Phantom or Binance Smart Chain or a lot of these other chains that won't incur the higher gas fees that we're still experiencing on Ethereum. Yes, Ethereum's a lot more affordable than it was ago, but it's still dollars versus pennies or fractions of a penny on some of these other chains. So it's a significant difference.
And there's also the fact that everybody needs to consider, like, centralized exchanges, they're great for exposure, but at the end of the day, there's a bunch of DeFi users sitting on the blockchain already. Like before the bear market was sitting at nearly $1 trillion market cap. They're your users that actually use DeFi applications and bring volume to your chain, not just buy on a centralized exchange and stay there. So targeting people that are already on the blockchain is, in my opinion, extremely beneficial to a blockchain's future, and onboarding, of course, at the start. So to start the space, because Bullish said I'm right to go, I really just need to express one more time that the devs have said that there is going to be no delay for a Shanghai upgrade or any other EIP. I see it all around everywhere, and I keep getting tagged in it. Please, I've asked the dev if I could take it out of the room and tweet it out. Like, I asked him personally, I know what you said, but can I please go put it on Twitter for other people so that they know? And he said, yeah, you can do that. Okay, so Shanghai will not delay Pulsechain. There's also a thing right now with Shanghai where the devs are arguing between themselves whether they want to put it out yet or not. So Pulsechain won't have unstaking until that upgrade goes out. But again, if you're becoming a validator, you're not really becoming a validator to be a validator for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. So for me, I don't think it's a big issue, but Shanghai will not delay Pulsechain, guys.